Good morning, party people. Time for an office hour session live. I was just going to do it disconnected. I was just going to go stream or record an office hours, and I thought, oh, why don't I see if anybody's up at this ungodly hour of the morning? It is 4:30 a.m. Vegas time. Oh, goodness, excuse me. First time that I've opened my mouth and started talking today, so of course the voice is a little raspy. And going to catch a flight this morning to New York City. So going to New York with Eve for a couple of weeks to go see shows, restaurants, go have dinner with Eric and Ashley Darling, wonderful people. Go to even the New York Comic Con was a last minute decision. I don't think a costume is going to happen. I got rid of my racing suit. I used to have a full-blown racing suit that I would use for costume type events, and I got rid of it when I moved because it had a red wine stain on the leg of all the oddball things. Good morning, Spitfire. Good to see you. So wear Clippy. That actually, so I have a green screen suit. I have a chroma key green screen suit. I've been meaning to bust this out at some point. I even keep it in my office. So I have a little green screen jumpsuit and it's even got a little zipper on the front, make it easy to pull on and off. So it's very easy I could do green screen work in here, plus I keep my Clippy hands. I've been meaning to do a How to Think Like the Engine class live, where I hop into Clippy's costume during the break. I think that would be funny as all get out. I'd have a really good time with that. I don't think that it really makes sense as much for Comic-Con, but if I had more of Clippy's costume instead of just the hands, but when I just have the hands and people don't know me, then they just think it's Mickey Mouse, and that's kind of the end of it. I use lowercase for select. Good to see you. So let's see here. The top upvoted question is from Neil. You're welcome to Straight. Yes, that's right. Today starts the month-long fundamentals classes, where everybody can go to the site and go watch the fundamentals classes for free. Not all of them, but like a good chunk of the modules. So I think it's also useful for people, and I'll get to that question here in a second too. I think it's also useful for people who aren't sure whether or not they can deal with recorded classes. Like some people are like, I would go to recorded classes, but I'm not sure whether or not I have the discipline for it, whether or not I'll be able to keep up with it. Now you'll be able to actually find out. Because you know what? Honest to God, a bunch of my buyers, they actually buy it, and then like the recorded class season pass, they buy the master's classes, whatever, and then they don't actually budget the time to attend. And I always feel guilty about that because the end of the year comes up and they're like, wait, I forgot to watch anything. And I'm like, they go, well, will you just give me another month? And I'm like, if I just give you one more month, you're not going to watch it. You postponed it for a year. You're going to postpone it for another month. This kind of helps people test out the waters and see, could I actually budget enough time for that? See both people, yes. And you're certainly not alone. I kind of lovingly refer to that class of my buyers as collectors, that they collect the training, but they don't actually read it in much the same way that people like collect baseball cards or movie memorabilia, and then they don't actually use it. I sold my, go way off on a tangent here, sold my Porsche 944. Good morning, Jim. Hey, Jim's probably interested in this. So I just sold my Porsche 944 to a collector. I'd bought it. Doug DeMuro reviewed it. I loved it. It was a really nice car, drove beautifully. And I got an offer from a collector in the Northeast. And so I'm talking to him, and he's like, all he collects is low mileage German cars. And the helmet I sold years ago. I did like a year or two ago, probably about a year ago. And I said, so what, you collect low mileage German cars? What do you mean by that? And he's got like a 1980s Audis and BMWs with less than 5,000 miles on them. He has one of them. He has an Audi TT the first year with less than 500 miles on it. And I'm like, what's the point of that? What's the point of collecting cars that are that low mileage? All right, so let's go take a look here. So we have Neil says, are there any Band-Aids a DBA can apply for third-party applications that deadlock all the time, or is it up to the vendor? So for me, it depends on. So like, for example, you say tweak some indexes. So for me, it depends on what is a DBA allowed to do. In some shops, a DBA is allowed to add indexes to third-party applications, add a plan guide, for example, using Query Store. They're not usually allowed to change the code, but they are usually allowed. You're welcome, AJ. You are usually aren't even usually allowed to add indexes. So in that case, if you're not allowed to add or change queries or change indexes, there's really not a lot that you can do to prevent deadlocks. In the mastering classes, I explain how blocking and deadlocking all comes down to three things: having enough indexes but not too many, keeping your transaction short and sweet, and using the right isolation level. All of those usually involve work on the application side. Now, when you say tweaking indexes, that means you may not just be a database administrator for that application. So before you start doing indexes on there, I just make sure that you get okay from the vendor. Because the thing that worries me is if you add an index, you can break their deployments. For example, they might script out a bunch of changes to the table, and they might assume that they've dropped all of the relevant indexes, and then they go to change something, and then their deployment script fails, leaving you with a half-useful database. That gets kind of risky, so I worry about that one. Targa like your old. Jim says a Targa like your old one sold for $165,000 at auction. Well, remember the market went up big time. Like, it's really hard to time the market on used cars. I don't think any of us could have predicted just how it kept accelerating. So the way I look at it is, I got to drive a Porsche 911 for years for free. I'm kind of okay with that. I don't mind that too much at all. Next up, Yehudah asks, what's the best way to track down the top queries that are causing async network I/O waits? I didn't see this as an option in SP Blitz Cache. You teach you more about that in the Mastering Server Tuning class. Go to Mastering Server Tuning and choose the module on async network I/O waits. Youssef asks, for your 5 and 5 guidelines, do you have a total byte limit that you try to keep the include columns under? No. Makes no difference to me. In How to Think Like the Engine, I talk about the how includes basically have the same rough overhead as stuff in the keys. So I'm more worried about the impacts of insert, update, and delete operation and overall index size. It doesn't make a difference to me whether it's in the includes or in the keys. Watch How to Think Like the Engine for more info on that. Next up, we have Remko. Remko says, hi, I'm a BI dev. My new server's slower than the old one. Supplier doesn't seem to be able to pinpoint it. I advised management to hire a DBA consultant. There you go. SP Blitz says slow writes on drives. Could this be to the format? Any other reasons? Okay, so what you're really saying is, why is my server slow? And if you think that I can answer that on a webcast like this, if I could answer that on a webcast like this, I wouldn't make money as a consultant. I would just answer that on webcasts like this and have some other full-time job. I wish it was that easy. It would be amazing if it was that easy. Sadly, it is not. Next up, we have Malachi, who asks, what is your recommended network speed for corresponding SQL Server batch requests per second? I don't usually recommend specific network speeds. You need exactly 3.5 gigabytes of upload speed. I would just say get the fastest networking that you can. Networking's relatively inexpensive compared to SQL Server licensing, compared to CPU, compared to RAM. So in this day and age, if you're not using at least gig Ethernet, if not 10 gig Ethernet, that's just kind of all I really worry about. Networking is rarely the bottleneck for SQL Server. Because if you think about why, if you're going to saturate a 10 gig Ethernet port going out with results, that's going to be a lot of data. That's going to be things like selecting star from a table, like a really wide table, lots of rows. It takes a lot for SQL Server to saturate 10 gig on the way out. And to do that, it's probably blocking, there's CPU problems, there's storage problems. generally speaking, like saying, I don't think I've ever told a client you need more network throughput going out or coming in. It just isn't really relevant. Next up, Yehudah asks an interesting question. What do you estimate the percentages are for your own students that pay for Ozar training via their company versus out of their own pocket? I have no idea. I've never surveyed that. My gut hunch is that the people who buy during the Black Friday sales in November, a good chunk of those who buy in the first week seem to be personal. And then the ones who buy via company, they all postpone to the last day because the company has all this bureaucracy that they have to deal with and red tape. And they're always like, I didn't get the check out in time. Can you give me one more day? Things like that. And then the people who buy all year long tend to be buying with their own money. Buying with their company's money. Because people who buy all year long typically tend to buy at full price. And then the people who are paying individually, they hold out for my annual Black Friday sale that starts in November. There you go. Next up, we have MyFriend asks, Hi, Brent. Do you consider an uptime of one business day too small in the context of making reliable death method decisions on a production database? When I work with clients, what I'll usually say is I'd like 30 days worth of uptime. So that way that I can get a pretty good idea of what your business cycles are. Because sometimes people have dramatically different business cycles through the course of the month. Stuff that's more than like 45 days worth of uptime, I start to actually get nervous because the application could have been different. People change their queries, people use it differently across the span of large periods of time. Plus, it often means that they're not doing patching, like the latest SQL Server 2019 cumulative update happened to drop last week, if I remember right. If I'm under the gun, so a lot of what I do is emergency performance tuning for clients where all hell is broken loose. Things are really bad. Sometimes they only have a couple few days worth of uptime. The way that I ask them is, do the last couple few days serve as a pretty good representation of your workload overall through the entire month? Great example, stock trading firms. Stock trading firms have roughly the same workload every day. As long as it's a weekday and a business day, markets are open, it's roughly the same workload every day. There are different quantities of the workload, but it's roughly the same workload every day. Same thing for like e-commerce shops. People check in, people check out. One day is usually a good enough uptime. But if somebody's doing like an accounting company and they go, no, this is the 14th of the month and we're not closing books right now, then I start to get nervous that I won't be able to do really good index recommendations. See, next up we have deferred names cause problems. Asks, Hi Brent, I'm looking for a query to find all the procs that have deferred name resolution. Okay, stop. I don't know what problem you're trying to solve, but I have two words for you, dynamic SQL. If you have any code that does dynamic SQL, you don't know what it's doing until it actually executes. Static code analysis is going to be worthless to you. Then same thing, of course, if you do anything like entity framework code and hibernate, Dapper, any kind of ORM, you don't know what objects they're accessing until the code runs. So what I would be more curious about is what's the problem that you're trying to solve? What are users going, this is broken because blank? Or do you just believe, like your username says, I found this hammer and I'm going to find every way I can to use the hammer? Put the hammer down. We have other tools. Go find out what your users are complaining about, because odds are it's not this. If it is that, you're not going to be able to find it via static code analysis. You're going to have to find out, are the users calling in for some kind of error? And if so, you need to start trapping that error and then working on root cause analysis. Next up, Leszek asks, Is there a good performance feature to do auditing? Data changes, table name. Table name? Table name? Who's changing your table names? Okay, so if you got people changing your table names and you're worried about capturing that, you don't have an auditing problem, you have a security problem. Like, people should not be changing names of tables in production. That immediately sets off a big, huge warning bell for me. So the first thing that I would say is step way back, because you said do it manually in code. Well, hold on. Almost anything that you're going to use, whether it's via SQL Server or whether it's via code that you write, is going to break when people change the names of tables. For example, if you try to do any kind of SQL Server auditing solution, you might try to use auditing of every DDL that ever happens, but I get really nervous. I would start with who's changing table names and why. Start reducing people's security in the application. The two roles that people probably need are data reader and data writer. So that way they can change, insert, update, and delete, and they can do selects, but they can't change objects. That way, if you start to lock that down so people can't change objects, you may find that that's a better route across the finish line. It says, Frog King, or Frag King. I almost thought it was Frog King. Frag King says, I think he's looking to just record the table name as a data point. Oh, you're probably right. So if my personal favorite way to do this, and I know I'm going to piss people off when I say it, is triggers. The reason why I like triggers is all of the built-in SQL Server objects, they don't let you pick which columns you care about and who's making the change that you care about. For example, I don't want to catch changes from a known service account whose job is to do all kinds of inserts, updates, and deletes. I only want to catch it when users go in there or when an ETL service goes in there. So this way, putting a trigger on the table helps me pick only the columns that I care about, because I may not want to log things like last updated date or a big old varchar max column that I just don't care about the contents of. So triggers can be, depending on how you code them, way faster than the stuff that's built into SQL Server. That's my personal favorite. Next up, we have Youssef asks, this is a tough one. Youssef asks, I've been introduced to SQL Server at 18. I'm 22 now with a senior production DBA senior production development DBA full-time position, and I'm somehow consulted can start. You like multi-syllable words, don't you? It's really early in the morning for me here. I'm not ready for quite that many multi-syllable words. I'm not even ready to read questions, as Frag King pointed out. How can I move up higher and go global? Of course, I'm biased. I'm biased because you look at my track record, and so there's some survivorship bias here. I think the way to go global is to start a blog, do presenting, get your face out there. That doing work for individual companies will only get you so far, only scale you so far. It'll get you word of mouth, which is good. But if you truly want to go global, you have to get your face out there. You have to do writing. You have to do presenting. If you think about all the names that you know in the SQL Server community, if I asked you to name, and you say specifically consulting, if I asked you to name 5 SQL Server consultants, I guarantee you the way that you would know their names, especially when you say global, 5 global SQL Server consultants, I guarantee you the way that you know their names is you've been reading their material, watching them present, using their scripts, things like that. So that right there is the cookie cutter answer for if you want to go global, that's what that looks like. Next up we have, Don't Blame Anthony asks, back in your DBA days, how did you handle requests to delete old data and requests to delete old databases? I did it. If you want to, keep a backup, but not sure what you mean. How did I handle it? I just bucked up and did it. And that's the end of it. You gotta do what you gotta do asks. And Frankie, so the thing that I was like, that kind of also implies that we don't have backups. I just want to kind of set the backup aside, so I'm not quite sure how to respond. But you're absolutely right. Frankie's absolutely right. You gotta do what you gotta do. Says, hi, Brent, has you ever found as a consultant performance issues related to change data capture? Yes. Yes. Where you had your hands tied. Sometimes I pay extra to have my hands tied. That's just a personal preference. I understand that not everyone's into that. How did you manage those cases? I worked on improving the performance. On we go. Next up, we have Uncle Leo asks, do you have any clients that do poor man's log shipping where they have log backups but their own code do the copy and restores? Yes. For example, with SP all night log, all night. Now, I no longer do production DBA work personally. I don't find backups, restores, patching, cluster troubleshooting. Those aren't things that light my fire. I'm now these days a completely performance guy. So you ask if I have clients that do that. Yes. When is a poor man's log shipping a better fit over traditional log shipping? When the two servers can't talk to each other. You know your relationship with your parents where you're not really on speaking terms. I mean, you could speak if you had to about the upcoming Christmas holiday and how you're trying to find excuses in order to go over to their house. But generally speaking, you're not on a speaking term with them. You know how they leave you notes from time to time because you're still living in your parents' basement. They leave you notes from time to time. Hey, the stink is getting bad. Can you take out the trash? So this concept of leaving notes behind in a shared area where both of you can access, that's what poor man's log shipping is. So the production SQL Server can take those backups, write them to a file share. Something else is responsible for syncing the file share up to the cloud. And then the log shipped secondaries, aka you living in your parents' basement, can pick up those files and just restore them every time a new file shows up. So it's really nice for disaster recovery to the cloud. Disaster recovery cross cloud are both great examples. Also, time to get your own place. Stefano asks, is there any performance benefit to querying a snapshot of an AG replicated database? No. No. Don't do that. Don't do that. I don't know where you got that idea. That's creative and insane. No. Don't do that. All right. Next up, half the time I want to ask to the answers to these. What problem are you trying to solve? If you think you're seeing blocking on an AG secondary, a snapshot isn't going to fix it. Because if you're seeing blocking on an AG secondary due to activity that's happening over on the primary, which can absolutely happen, then the solution isn't going to be add a snapshot because that's going to add even more disk overhead over on the secondary, making things even worse. The thing that you probably would want to think about is make sure you're hitting an async read-only secondary, not a sync secondary. I generally advise my clients that sync secondaries are for HA and DR. Async secondaries are for reporting purposes. You don't want to slow down transactions on the primary. Next up, we have, let's see here, Still Learning asks, hi, Brent, I must execute long-running queries on Azure SQL DB with concurrent OLTP queries. Azure SQL DB doesn't have resource governor. Are there tips to write resource-friendly SQL scripts to work around that? Are there tips to writing good SQL queries? Are there tips to... Man, it would be cool if someone had like a training class on how to make your SQL queries faster. I wonder, do you know anyone who might write training classes like that? Anyone who has a website that has the word training on the top where you put in your credit card and you learn how to make queries go faster. Maroon 5. Next up, Cassian asks, "What is your opinion?" He wants credit cards. What is your opinion of memory optimized TempDB metadata in 2019, 2022? Is it safe to enable? So when it first came out, it was buggy as all hell. I haven't touched it since. I don't have any real world impact or any real world insight on whether or not it's safe or dangerous these days in current cumulative updates. But SQL Server 2019 has been out for 3 years now, and there have been either 18, 19 cumulative updates. I think it's fairly safe, probably. I remember there's an issue where you can't do column store indexes in TempDB, but I'm really like, how often do people do column store indexes in TempDB? For me, in my Fundamentals of TempDB class, I talk about alternative ways to make your code go faster without having to add that feature. But it's not like I've ever told a client to turn it off. I've also never seen a client with it turned on. So it's one of those where it might be fine, it might be full of bees. I have absolutely no clue. But at SQL Server 2019, with being out for 3 years, I feel pretty safe with it. There wouldn't be anything that scared me off. If I genuinely needed it, I just wouldn't turn it on unless I needed it. And that, for me, is a big lesson out of a lot of SQL Server features. People are like, what does this button do? And then they go flip it, and I'm like, I don't know that you really want to push that button right now. Next up, Yehudah. I bet that's a beautiful name. Like, it has just all really cool letters, and I want to know how to pronounce it now. Do you have a recommended way to easily migrate 2019 from one VM to another? For me, log shipping is my personal favorite, because you're probably already taking backups on the primary. Now you're just restoring those backups over on a secondary, so it's relatively low overhead. That's my personal favorite way for migration. Desi asks, is it better to use SET NOCOUNT ON? I want to be sarcastic here, but the answer is yes. It's better to use it. Yes, the answer is yes. You asked a yes or no question, you get a yes or no answer, and off we go. Oh, Yehudah, why says, is it difficult or easy to learn Postgres if you already know SQL Server? If you're learning it to query it, it's very easy. If you're learning it to manage it, I don't think it's as easy. Some of the same issues that we have in SQL Server, they have, but there are a lot of other different issues, like how you handle high availability and disaster recovery, how you handle the vacuum process. For me, that's why when Richie and I built SQL Constant Care, our monitoring tool, we chose to host it in Amazon Aurora Postgres so that I'm not the database administrator, because I'm certainly not smart enough to be not experienced enough to be a production database administrator in Postgres. I don't plan on teaching any database administration in Postgres ever, let alone doing it myself. So, hey, David, welcome to the party. That's all right. I did the party unscheduled, so you're not necessarily late. Brasso asks, what are your thoughts on using SQL Server to query Parquet, CSV, and JSON files? I don't understand why people are doing this. SQL Server Enterprise Edition is $7,000 per CPU core. When I have software that costs $7,000 per CPU core, I actively, creatively find ways not to use it. I don't want to store files in it. I don't want to use it for building Excel files. I don't want to use it for linked server. I don't want to use it. It's expensive. And yet, I'm always amazed by people who are like, well, that's true too. A lot of people don't pay for it, and they don't realize how ugly and expensive it gets as your usage starts to grow. But I never understand people who are like, yeah, I bought this diamond ring from Tiffany's, and I use it to cut wood. I'm like, that's not an appropriate use of that thing that you bought. Just because it's expensive and you're like, I want to get a lot of mileage out of this Tiffany ring. I spent a lot for it. Time to give me another 2x4. That's not a good use for that tool. Now, Does Microsoft want you to cut wood with a Tiffany ring? Of course they do. They're like, hey, we got these diamond rings for you. Wouldn't you like to cut wood? Check out how this diamond ring cuts wood. And if you pay attention, you're like, wait, that doesn't really cut wood well at all. You can go buy a $50 table or buy a $50 saw, and you're off to the races. So for me, I think it's utterly idiotic, but who am I to say? I also make money when people use tools inappropriately. People are like coming in, they're like, I got this diamond ring and it's so slow when I go to cut wood. And I'm like, great, let me take you to the promised land. We're going to Home Depot. I'm going to get you a saw. They're like, oh, you're so smart and attractive. And I take their money because people who are dumb enough to use diamonds to cut wood, they have a lot of money. So in some sense, I like them quite a bit. And we'll do one more. Jason Everell asks, we have a 2008 R2 instance. Hey, good to see you live, Mr. Toby. We have a 2008 R2 instance, and I'm trying everything within my power to get the org to move to 2019. What are the best resources to allow to, we don't have a DBA. Oh, this is really interesting. Okay, so if you don't have a DBA and you're on 2008 R2, so 2008 R2 came out around about 2010. So the database is already about 12 years old, probably about 13 years old, or the server is. That's a company that doesn't like to invest much in their databases. And that's fine. They hired you, right? Like, all I care about is that they keep you hired and keep you paid for. I don't really give a rip whether they spend more money on new technology. I pretty well guarantee they didn't buy software assurance, which is the thing that lets you automatically upgrade to newer versions of SQL Server. So they spent a lump sum of money 12 years ago, and they've gotten a lot of money out of their technology since then. As a business, oh, thanks, Anexi, I appreciate the subscription. As a business, I kind of go, they're doing it right. I mean, you want someone to just pay once and then get a lot of mileage out of their investment, and I'd rather they pay you. So I get nervous about, hey, how can we get the business to go splurge? If you think about SQL Server 2019, even say they're doing standard edition, is $2,000 per CPU core. And the minimum they can buy is 4 cores. So that's $8,000 bare minimum that they would spend on a 4-core server. I don't know that they need it that bad. I would start asking, what is it that they need to do that they can't do today? Now, inevitably, people in the comments are going to be like, oh my God, legal compliance. They're not in legal compliance. A lot of businesses don't need to be. A lot of businesses don't need legal compliance or just storing phone book records or something like that. But if you do need any kind of encryption, compliance, legal security type stuff, I wouldn't actually go to SQL Server 2019. I'd go to Azure SQL DB or Amazon RDS. The reason why is if this company hasn't put $1 into their hardware or software since for 12 years, they need someone else at the wheel managing updates continuously. Again, people in the comments are going to be like, it's going to be so expensive. Well, remember, I said only if they have compliance needs, security needs, legal needs, things like that. If you have legal compliance needs, like if you're hosting customer information inside a database unencrypted and you're worried about the backups getting out there, you're holding personally identifiable data for patients, for children, whatever, then you probably need to start handing over some of the keys to trained professionals, and that's where stuff like Azure SQL DB, Amazon RDS, Google Cloud SQL come in. You're going to pay a monthly fee, and they're going to manage some of the production stuff for you to make sure you have backups done, for example. And that's going to be way cheaper than hiring a full-time DBA. All right, that is all the high-voted questions out there. I am going to clear out the question queues. Let's see here. We will stop taking messages and erase all messages so that way people can go get in a fresh batch of questions. There's a bunch of stuff that's been in there for like a week and nobody's really upvoted much. So I'll lose out of those. Thanks for hanging out with me this morning. It is time for me to go. I was going to say go pack, but I've already packed to head over to New York City. Now it's just I got to go have a nice, tasty breakfast and then go check on Eve and see how packing's going over there and then go from there. So thanks for hanging out with me this morning, and I will see y'all at the next office hours. Adios, y'all.